A school teacher, sits in a sweltering Australian Outback pub, drowning in beer and male bravado, while a brutal kangaroo hunt awaits. Thousands of miles away, a restless young hustler schemes his way through the bustling streets of Montreal, desperate to escape the fate life has dealt him. These scenes, one's from Wake and Fright, the others from the Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz, are worlds apart. Yet both bear the fingerprints of Ted Kotcheff, the Canadian-born director of Bulgarian background, who helped put the Australian and Canadian film industries on the global stage. And when he eventually turned his lens toward the American cinema, in The First Blood, he brought the same sharp eye for alienation and survival, transforming a pulp action story about Rambo into one of the most enduring portraits of the Vietnam War's lingering wounds. This is the story of Ted Kotcheff and his 5 most important films. During high school, Kotcheff worked at a Goodyear factory and in a slaughterhouse. He studied at University College, Toronto, graduating with a degree in English literature. He began his career at the age of 24, when he joined the staff of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, with television in its infancy. He was the youngest director on the staff of the CBC, where he worked on various shows. Kotcheff then moved to Great Britain in 1958, after 5 years of working in Canadian television. In London, he directed an anthology drama program and various other shows. He also directed in the theater. During one of the television plays transmitted live, Kotcheff was required to cope when one of the actors, playing a character who was to die of a heart attack, suddenly died of one himself, off camera, while between scenes, leaving other actors and the director to improvise. By the end of the 1960s, Kotcheff made 3 thematically and stylistically inconsistent feature films. The first one is his debut, called Tiara Tahiti, from 1962, and it is a comedy drama about a tough colonel and a refined captain who clashed during the war and continue their personal battle in peacetime Tahiti. The second one is Life at the Top, from 1965, a sequel to the film Room at the Top, from 1959, where main character tries to escape his working-class background through his marriage to the daughter of a wealthy mill owner. 10 years on, he is living the dream of the successful young executive. However, his life is not the dream it appears to be. The third film is Two Gentlemen Sharing, from 1969. The film is about an upper-class white man who is forced to confront his own feelings and prejudices when the London flat he advertises for sharing is taken up by an Oxford-educated black Jamaican. After his British period, Ted Kotcheff tried his hand overseas, where he finally achieved his recognition. A disquieting classic of Aussie cinema, Wake and Fright is a 1971 psychological thriller that is considered a pivotal film of the Australian New Wave. The story follows John Grant, a school teacher who descends into personal moral degradation and spirals into a harrowing psychological collapse after finding himself stranded in a brutal, menacing town in Outback, Australia. The film stars Gary Bond, an English actor that is known for his performances in several notable West End plays and musicals. Wake and Fright would be his final theatrical film. After this movie, his other projects were mostly TV works. This was also the last film to feature the veteran character actor Chips Rafferty, often called the living symbol of the typical Australian. Rafferty died of a heart attack prior to the film's release, and never saw his final on-screen appearance. Often regarded as the embodiment of the rugged Australian spirit, Rafferty's career stretched from the late 1930s until he died in 1971. And during this time he performed regularly in major Australian feature films as well as appearing in British and American productions. With his iconic charm, tall frame, and distinctive drawl, Rafferty helped shape the image of the Australian male on screen, and remains a key figure in the country's film history. The movie also stars Donald Pleasence, an English actor best known for the James Bond film You Only Live Twice, and Halloween directed by John Carpenter. Wake in Fright is the first film with Jack Thompson, a future Aussie cinema star, best known as a lead actor in such classics as The Club and Sunday Too Far Away. Written by Evan Jones, the film is based on Kenneth Cook's 1961 acclaimed novel of the same name, whose title is taken from an old curse: "May you dream of the devil and wake in fright." Cook was an Australian journalist, documentary maker, and writer. His novel, Wake in Fright, is still in print 5 decades after its first publication. A film adaptation of Wake in Fright was first linked with the actor Dirk Bogarde, to whom Kenneth Cook originally sold the book rights in 1963. Bogarde intended to play the lead role of John Grant and make the film for his production company. Ted Kotcheff was recruited to direct the film, only when Bogarde left the project, and the rights were eventually bought by another company. Michael York was Kotcheff's initial choice to play John Grant, but he turned down the role due to being offended by the kangaroo hunting scene. Years later, during a chance encounter with the director, York admitted, "To my dying day I will regret not doing that wonderful picture." The role of Doc Tydon went to Donald Pleasence, after James Mason and Robert Helpman, who were both considered playing the role, were replaced due to scheduling conflicts. His performance was quite impressive, and the Australian crew were hugely impressed by English-born Pleasence's realistic Aussie accent. Great performances were central to the film's impact. Gary Bond masterfully captures Grant's transformation, from aloof outsider to complicit participant in the town's excesses, while Donald Pleasence's disheveled Doc Tydon embodies a nihilism that feels both magnetic and repulsive. The shooting of Wake in Fright began in January of 1970, in the mining town of Broken Hill, the area which had inspired Cook for the setting of his novel. The interesting fact is that Broken Hill, posing as the fictional town of Bundiniaba, is one of the most isolated inland towns in Australia. The production aimed to capture the harshness and isolation of the Australian outback, using the real heat and desolate landscapes to heighten the film's tense atmosphere. Therefore, the crew worked under extreme heat conditions that mirrored the oppressive atmosphere depicted in the story. The crew itself was quite diverse. As stated by writer Stephen Vagg, the first masterpiece of the revived Australian film industry was directed by a Canadian, from a script by a Jamaican, with a Norwegian producer, and financed from an American fridge manufacturer. The drinking session inside Doc Tydon's shed was not filmed on location, but instead inside of the studio. One crew member was tasked with finding hundreds of flies, which he would feed into the shed through holes in the corrugated iron wall. Another important aspect of the story is alcohol. There are more than 100 occurrences in the film where a person drinks alcohol, mostly beer. Actor Chips Rafferty insisted on drinking real pints of beer during the bar sequences. Kotcheff substituted non-alcoholic beer for the real ones, but Rafferty could tell immediately that it had no alcohol and demanded proper pints be served. He told Kotcheff, "You concentrate on the directing, I'll concentrate on the drinking." The director calculated that due to this, Rafferty was drinking up to 30 pints per day. Besides its use of the alcohol, the film is filled with impressive scenes. One such is the two-up gambling sequence, in which John Grant loses all of his money. The artificial banknotes printed for shooting this scene look so realistic that 2 extras were later arrested for trying to pass them off as genuine currency. The film also features the infamous and graphic hunting sequence, during which one kangaroo is killed by a hunting dog, many are shot with a rifle, and one even appears to be deliberately run over. Significant parts of this section were genuine footage of an actual hunt. The crew followed the real hunters, recording their bloody and drunken orgy of killing and senseless slaughter, to extremely distressing effect. Kotcheff, a vegetarian, has defended his use of the hunting footage in the film. A production note at the closing credits suggests that these disturbingly confronting images were kept uncut as a deliberate statement against hunting of kangaroos. The opening shot, which was done with a cherry picker, immediately introduces us with the film's music. The score was done by an English film composer, John Scott. For the music that plays when John Grant has a mental breakdown, Scott created the high-pitched noises by having a string section playing pizzicato at the high end of their instruments, and cut the recordings into improvised loops. The instrument that stands out the most is the Andes Martinat, an early electronic keyboard with a sound comparable to a theremin, an electro-musical instrument controlled without physical contact. Another instrument that also stands out is a didgeridoo, the wind instrument developed by Aboriginal people of Northern Australia. The cinematography, by Brian West, beautifully captures, as one critic said, the icy flooding charm of a first beer on a sweaty, heat-struck day, and the vast landscape of endless Outback, both sun-drenched and ruthlessly dark. The strong point of the film is also its naturalism, with the emphasis on booze, dirt, and violence. Kotcheff shoots the scenes with both documentary starkness and feverish surrealism. The sun-bleached streets, the claustrophobic pubs, and the incessant offers of beer transmute into a hypnotic nightmare. The film also successfully explores the themes of masculinity, alcohol, loneliness, and anxiety that traps its audience in a toxic cycle, as much as its lead character. Wake in Fright had its world premiere on opening night of the 1971 Cannes Film Festival. Ted Kotcheff was nominated for a Golden Palm Award, and the film found a favorable public response. Despite attracting positive reviews at Cannes, Australia, and in other countries, Wake in Fright suffered bad box office returns. There were complaints that the film's distributor, United Artists, had failed to promote the film. They had so little faith in the film that when it opened up in America, it was in a single theater on the east side of New York on a Sunday night. Also, a blizzard started not too long before, and because of these factors, not a single person saw the film on its opening day. The title Outback was the initial title, under which Wake in Fright was released outside Australia. So besides scant marketing, the change of the film's title also didn't help. Controversy surrounding its portrayal of outback life, a hunting scene in which real kangaroos are killed, and film's unsettling nature also failed to draw a large audience. After its initial commercial failure, the film went out of circulation for many years, mostly due to the dissolution of the production companies that were involved in its making. As a result, the original film and sound elements had gone missing, sparking an international search. In the meantime, censored prints of degraded quality were being used for its few television broadcasts and VHS releases. By the 1990s, Wake in Fright had developed a cult reputation as Australian great lost film. After a long search, the film was finally tracked down in the early 2000s. The original negatives were in a shipping container that was labeled for destruction. The film was then digitally remastered and was given a 2009 re-release at Cannes to widespread acclaim. Wake in Fright is one of only 2 films ever to screen twice in the history of the festival. The story of a school teacher who, after a bad gambling bet, is marooned in a town full of crazy, drunk, and violent men is now considered a pivotal film of the Australian cinema. The performances of the cast were called superb, and the director was credited for capturing the mindless brutality of life in the Outback with extraordinary felicity. Also, many praised the film's atmosphere of sordid realism, general foreboding, and sheer terror. Some even called it the greatest Australian film ever made. Roger Ebert called the film powerful, genuinely shocking, and rather amazing. Nick Cave, an Australian musician, singer, and songwriter, said, "Wake in Fright is the best and most terrifying film about Australia in existence." Martin Scorsese, an unknown in the industry at the time, sat behind the director Ted Kotcheff during the first screening of the film, and throughout the screening, excitedly made commentary on the on-screen action. Just like 40 years ago, he again praised the film during the restored version screening. In summary, Wake in Fright was re-evaluated, and finally got the exposure it deserved. Furthermore, it was remade as a 2-part TV miniseries that aired in 2017. Ted Kotcheff's Wake in Fright remains one of the most unsettling visions of Australia ever committed to film. On its surface, the film functions as a survival story without the wilderness. Grant's threat is not the harsh outback landscape, but the suffocating masculinity, alcohol-soaked camaraderie, and latent violence of the community. What makes Wake in Fright endure is its refusal to romanticize the Australian outback. Where other depictions lean on rugged beauty, Kotcheff focuses on a psychological decline and realistic horror. Grant's escape feels less like liberation than a return to a cycle, suggesting that once touched by the Yabba's fever, you never truly leave it. In this sense, Wake in Fright is less a thriller than a cultural exorcism, one that still haunts half a century later.